morning. Please turn with me to Psalm 36 as we look at the title this morning for the topic. Befriend. Befriend. Why? Because in the next psalm, David is going to say, befriend righteousness as he encourages people who are going through it. Because Psalm 37 is for folks who have gone through it. And as we say from time to time, don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to look like. And so he says there are some practical things that you can do while, like we say, sometimes it's life circumstances, sometimes it's not life circumstances, sometimes it's people. And Psalm 37 is a people song. And so when he is saying, in times when you are tempted to potentially lash out at people, said in the short lesson, he's going to say one of the primary warnings is do not fret. Do not fret. Do not fret. And I said it 3 times because he says it 3 times. He says it only tends to harm. And so as he says in those things that he is warning us not to be consumed in those times when we are consumed with people stress, he's going to give some positive, affirmative steps as well. And one of those steps is befriend righteousness. That's the title, Befriend. But I said turn to Psalm 36, hoping you will join me there. Why? Because Psalm 36 has a lot to do with some of the things that he says in Psalm 37. And Psalm 36 is one of those psalms that I think still flows along that pattern that I used in one of the first sermons, which was like water. We said sometimes it's just like a like a drink of water. And for me, that's what the first few verses were. 1, transgression speaks to the wicked deep in his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes. For he flatters himself in his own eyes that his iniquity cannot be found out and hated. The words of his mouth are trouble and deceit. He has ceased to act wisely and do good. He plots trouble while on his bed. He sets himself in a way that is not good. He does not reject evil. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time there because, like I said, we've probably all been in situations where we can relate to the way in which, God willing, that's simply a refreshing passage in a time when you are going through it and you really don't have an option or an out. But beyond that, it goes to the depths of the way in which God's word can function in many ways like an ocean. Why? Because it's literally going to say that in verse 5, or not in verse 5, but starting in verse 5 or continuing in verse 5. Your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mountains of God. Your judgments are like the great deep. Man and beast you save, O Lord. But like we said, it also goes into the minutia, the H2O, and that's where I'd like for us to focus our attention. The ways in which it can actually dissect us down to the molecular level. Verse 7, how precious is your steadfast love, how precious is your steadfast love, O God. The children of mankind take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light do we see light. Oh, continue your steadfast love to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright of heart. I'm going to stop there before it gets to the end. Why? Because this is a psalm that our brother read last week. Brother Don read Psalm 36, if I'm not mistaken, right? And one of the reasons why I went back there is I said I fell short last week because I intended to look up that term, steadfast love. And so this gives me a second chance to go back to that topic because I did look up steadfast love. And one of the things that I saw about steadfast love is in the definition, it assumes one of the reasons why, of course, I like to pat myself on the back. No, can't pat myself on the back. But one of the reasons why I found it difficult to use conditional love as a substitute is because Brown Driver Briggs was one of the dictionaries I looked at, and it literally breaks it up into 2 components. Steadfast love of God and the steadfast love of people. Why? Because the Complete Word Study Dictionary said that if we are his people, then that is the way we are going to love. And so one of those reasons why it didn't sound unconditional is when you look at the very definition, it presupposes that I have a role in the steadfast love of the Lord that says, if this is the way he has loved me, this is what I need to do. Why? Can I repay him? No, can't pay God back. And so even the ones who defined the term defined it as taking and it's a simple term in some ways. Like if you look at a lot of the explanations online, almost everyone acknowledges it doesn't lend itself to a single term. So when that word that they actually use in Hebrew is rendered, it's not always translated steadfast love. It's probably not even that way in your Bible. But even in the ESV that uses that term, that's only one of the ways of getting at what the term is. And when I looked at the term, it was one of those times when the definition was itself refreshing, because it simply said being kind, showing kindness. Showing the kinds of, oh, wait a minute, the same kinds of things that David's going to say. Turn forward with me to Psalm 41, to the choir master, a Psalm of David. Blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him. The Lord protects him and keeps him alive. He is called blessed in the land. You do not give him up to the will of his enemies. The Lord sustains him on his sickbed. In his illness, you restore him to full health. God willing, God willing, God willing. Because when I looked at the definition, I was like, Marcus, don't say that again. You preach that all the time. But the very definition that they use for the term referenced the target group for whom kindness is typically shown in, as opposed to other types of love, steadfast love. And so that is exactly the kind of situation, the kind of steadfast love or kindness, or genuinely, like I think one of the young people said once, it's just really like agape. It's not the love that you feel. It's not the one that gives you butterflies. It's not the one that makes you feel lightheaded and overwhelmed with emotion. It's the one that you simply do because someone needs help. And so that is the way that they literally defined steadfast love. It's not the one that feels fluttery. It's the one that simply sees a need and meets a need. And so when he says that is the way that God comes through for me, how do we know? How do we know that that's the steadfast love of the Lord even? Well, over and over when David is crying out in these Psalms, doesn't it make sense that over and over when he's using that whole term of, oh, you are my refuge, you are my stronghold in a time of trouble? It all seemed to come together when I saw them literally define it. Because he's saying, if in my time of need, you are the one who actually bailed me out, then the dictionary authors, they seem to have it completely right. It's not that complicated. That's who I need to be, God willing, for others who I see. Calling out for help. Like you said, sometimes I think Brother John said it, it's not always people who are calling out who need the encouragement. Sometimes it's the people who are just hurting and don't have enough left. Why? Because a lot of these Psalms are talking about, like we talked about in class, David's out of breath. Doesn't literally say that, but he's his flesh, his wounds. He's talking about those kinds of things. The fact that he's got other problems, and you ever been in one of those times when you got so many problems that telling people about them is the last thing on your mind? Wow, that's where I think he is, right? And so sometimes the need is seeing people who are exhausted to the point where outwardly, like we said, sometimes it's the difference between personality and character isn't always sinister. Sometimes it's people who are simply trying to hold it together so that they can make it from moment to moment. It is being able to see in those people the way that they need your steadfast love, the same way that you need it from God. That's the H2O. It's being able to see past the surface when the surface isn't simply a false front. It is a defense mechanism. It is a part of my struggle. It is a part of me trying to make it. It's being able to ask God. Oh, I ask for God for all kinds of discernment, right? I ask him to help me to be able to discern these scriptures. Help me to be able to discern my path. Which way should I go? God willing, I'm praying just as hard for him to be able to help me discern what people actually need beyond what I see. And to me, that's the H2O. It's getting beneath the surface. Yes, those first few verses are a drink of water for me. Yes, I understand that God has the depths to always be able to give me something to say. Because one of the things that we all have in common, brothers, whether it's leading songs or whether it's doing the communion talk, is we know what it's like to be embarrassed in public. I say it all the time, right? And so the great thing about God is if you walk with him very long, you know it's not him running out and giving us stuff to do or say. Sometimes it's just us in a human moment. The flow it's always there. That's the thing about the steadfast love. Like it says, the song says, the lamentation says, not the lamentation, whatever it says, it never ceases. It doesn't shut off just because I'm having a moment right now. It's always there. So sometimes when I'm having those moments, it's calling me back into its consistent flow. And so that is what I'm seeing here. And so, yes, it has the ability. Like it said, it wasn't just likening it to the deep. It said, what was it? Let me go back to the verses that talked about the second way in which steadfast love manifests itself. You give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. And in your light do we see light. God, give us the discernment or the interest in praying for the discernment to see what people need beyond what they're willing to share. But beyond steadfast love, it says to those who know you, And I don't want to repeat it because it's in the short lesson, but that passage literally hyperlinked to another story in the book of Jeremiah, where it goes to a piece of history that we looked at the last moment when Judah was about to be taken off into captivity. And God gave them a reprieve because a king by the name of Josiah repented. Just that much. And so ultimately what happened was after God turned it around, he made it clear when he went to the prophetess, not the prophet, he sent to the prophetess and she said, I'm going to give you a break during your reign, but Israel's sins are stacked so high that it's over. And what happened was his sons began to assume that just because it went good for Josiah, it was going to go good for them too. And God literally challenged them. Okay, I didn't want to turn to it. We won't because I didn't have it marked. Sorry, it was another passage. Book of Jeremiah. Man, maybe we should turn to it. Just pause with me. Now we'll all have a moment where we got to pause during the message. Jeremiah. Let me look it up. Jeremiah 22, around about verse 15. Oh, there. Jeremiah 22. Let's begin at verse 11. For thus the Lord says concerning Shallum, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, who reigned instead of Josiah his father, and who went away from this place. He shall return here no more. But in the place where they have carried him captive, there he shall die, and he shall never see this place again. Please skip down for me, down to verse 15, where it'll say, do you think that you are a king because you compete in cedar? Did not your father eat and drink and do justice and righteousness? Then it was well with him. Let me read that differently. Then it was well with him. He judges the cause of the poor and needy. Then it was well. Is not this to know me? And so now we have a building of terms. Like I said, just as when I looked up the definition, as we turn back to Psalm 36, I literally hit the hyperlink, and that is what they used to define the term, what it means to know God. That's the story they turned to. And they said, look, if you're looking at the passing of the baton between these two generations, I likened it to one of my favorite analogies, called it waiting for Amazon. What do you think it would be if me, not as an employee, but as a consumer, I registered for Amazon, not just the regular Amazon. I got the Prime one. I saw one of my neighbors. They had a package the other day. I was doing the laundry. I'm one of those who, when I see a package at your door, I walk the other way. I walk the long way around because I don't want to go, hey, he took the package. No, not me, bud. That's just me sharing. But the bottom line is, what if it was me who was looking at packages and being like, that's pretty cool. When are they going to deliver mine? When's mine coming? I got the Prime one. When did they show up? I didn't place an order. And so understand how that's what he's telling to Josiah's sons. Your father was delivered the steadfast love of not having to be consumed in Israel's or Judah's final condemnation because he knew me. Unlike his predecessors who got Israel or Judah into this mess. And so guess what? You haven't placed the order, bud. You don't know me. And so in your days, that's when the calamity is going to happen. And so he is saying, your father had a relationship where he actually, like Amazon, he didn't just get the Prime membership. You got the Prime membership. You're sitting on the throne, bud. But you got to do something in order to establish a knowledge of God. It's not just me saying I got a knowledge of God. Of course, I'm the king of Israel. We're his people. We like to say, God bless America. Yeah, God, hopefully, but literally Israel was his people, right? And even if in Israel just sitting on the throne didn't cut it, understand what God is saying to us, there are some things he is telling us to do that we need to do to make sure that order actually gets delivered. And so when we're looking at that whole concept of knowing God back in Psalm 36, that is David saying, it's not just Josiah. There was no Josiah by the time David was around, I'm going to guess. That was a few generations later. But that concept is eternal. What does it genuinely mean to know God? Why? As I told you, one of the greatest sermons I ever heard stuck with me from the time I was a kid. Brother Foster, man under whom I grew up, challenged us once. Do you know God? And I told you it was a life-changing moment for me because my answer was flat out, no, I don't. I don't even know what that means. And it didn't really start becoming clear until I hit this chapter this week and hit that hyperlink. Because it's one of those things you just kind of put off in the back burner. That'd be a good thing to know. That'd be a great word study one day. And all of a sudden, God just divinely gave me an opportunity to click on at least one story that helps us understand what he means when he says, you need to know me. So when we talk about that whole concept of knowing God, like you said, it would sound silly. If I ordered Amazon Prime and just wanted the packages to start showing up. But that is the same challenge that David is making to us when he says, the steadfast love, verse 10. Continue your steadfast love to those who know you. It's not a blank check. And your righteousness to the upright of heart. That was another interesting one because I've been, once again, putting that whole concept or study of uprightness to the back burner. And I studied it probably a little bit, but it didn't hit the same way it hits right now when I'm looking at it next to steadfast love because it's so similar in terms of what its definition actually means. And once again, it's in its simplicity that it finally caught on this time. It simply means a level path. And so when you see John prophesy as the one who is going before Jesus to level the paths before him, it kicks in with that same concept that John was one who, by this definition, seems to have had the role of being the upright introduction to the ministry of Christ. Understanding even more when it talks about upright paths. Once again, it is that thing that has that same compulsory thing. God himself is upright, and therefore he expects us to be upright. And the degree to which the Psalms over and over appeal to God's uprightness is, God, my path, my life it's difficult enough. To the degree that you can, like we said, to the degree that I'm not putting myself in difficult positions, can you simply make it easy for me to do the things you've asked me to do? And that's essentially what that term upright means. It's like you've been given a mission. God bless those people who make it easy for you to accomplish the things that God is trying to get you to do. And that is the concept of uprightness. And so that is what we see in the ministry of Christ when John was sent before him to make it possibly a little bit easier for him to do the things that he was sent to do. And so in looking at that whole concept of your righteousness is to the upright. Once again, that's another one of those conditional terms. What did righteousness mean? I got extra happy this morning. I looked up righteousness because I hadn't looked that one up yet. I've looked it up before, but it all fell into place when this time it's talking about this particular word for righteousness talks about, oh, wait a minute, something that David's talking about over and over and over again. The fact that God loves justice, that very thing he was saying to Josiah's sons. It went well with your dad because he provided justice for the people. And that's what this word righteousness is akin to. He's basically saying your balance or the balance of your judgment is for the upright. And what did that mean to me? When I saw it, why was it so much more clear seemingly this time? Well, it was because it goes back to that whole principle of, wait a minute, if I'm waiting on the Lord, and like we talked about last week, that presupposes that I am actually doing the kinds of things that are consistent with saying in meekness. There are some things I could do to affect or move forward my own quote unquote kingdom. I mean, Saul's really literally sleeping at my feet. So, right? And so the soldiers are like, you don't touch him, boss. I got it. And what they're basically willing to do is put their life on the line because they know the word says you don't touch God's anointed. And so that's another level of loyalty. But in meekness, David is saying to God, you are my refuge. And this is not my time to strike because I know what you said about not touching God's anointed. And it happened twice. And so if I'm literally saying that God is my refuge, I have to stay my hand when it is perfectly within my power to do what I want to do to effectuate justice. David wasn't getting even. That was the just penalty for Saul trying to pin him to the wall, right? And so he is saying, if I am taking justice into my own hands, guess who I'm being left to? The justice of those who take matters into their own hands. But there is a different level of justice for those who wait for God. And that is what this is talking about. When it says his righteousness is to the upright, it is for those who were patient enough not to get even when they were probably perfectly in their rights to get even, but they waited for God. And why is that so important? Why? Because we said David is not always going to be the one who is the hero of the story. Like I said, one of the things, the lingering lessons for me from preaching school, be careful of making yourself the hero of your own story, right? And why is that? It's easy to say, it's hard to do, because it's easy for me to see somebody, when you're making yourself the hero of your own story, you need to come down a notch, bud. But then when I'm telling the story, it's hard to put that discipline on myself, not to try to make myself the hero of the story. And it's so important because in Psalms, like we talked about in class, 38 and 39, David is firmly aware, even if he wasn't before, that he is not always the hero of the story. And so one of the reasons why he needs the justice of God is because it comes along with a measure of mercy that you can't necessarily expect from people. And so the value in staying your hand when it is in your power to probably even fairly execute judgment on your own power is when it's your time to sit in the judgment seat. Not the seat rendering judgment, but the seat of guilty. You're going to want the judgment that comes along with an extra measure of mercy. And so that is the wisdom in what David is seeing here. How do we know? How do we know? Because, I forgot just that quick. Once again, brother. Another illustration. But the bottom line is when David took the census, how did he measure? We talk about it from time to time. It's like the movie It. You got the 3 doors. You got the scary, you got the really scary, and you got the not scary at all. You know, they're all miserable, right? And so that is literally what David was having to face when he had 3 options. 2 of which came at the hands of man, 1 came at the hand of the Lord. He knew none of them were good, but the one he picked well, because he knew if it came at the hand of the Lord, it could come with the Lord's justice. And sure enough, the Lord cut the punishment short. And so that's the wisdom of what we see here when David is saying in chapter 36, verse 10, "Oh, continue your steadfast love to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright." Once again, it's not a blank check. It is saying that in those times when you are the hero of the story, how are you administering justice? Because justice is one thing, but ultimately, are you looking forward? We talked about the term before, aharit, the final end. Are you looking past the moment when God has now delivered your enemy into your hand, into the fact that you don't know how long your life is going to last? The wisdom of what our brother John mentioned on Wednesday night seems that, which psalm is this? In Psalm 39, another level of wisdom that David seems to have when he is in that moment where it is actually because of his transgressions that seems to be going through it again. How do you know? Psalm 39, verse 8, "Deliver me from all my transgressions and do not make me the scorn of the fool." But he said before that, in verse 2, that I was mute and silent. I held my peace to no avail, and my distress got worse. My heart became hot within me. As I mused, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. "O Lord, make me know my end, and what is the measure of my days. Let me know how fleeting I am. Behold, you have made my days a few handbreadths, and my lifetime is as nothing before you. Surely all mankind stands as a mere breath. Surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely for nothing they are in turmoil. Man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather." David had the wisdom to know that, oh, I might be up on the judgment seat today, fully vindicated by God, but I don't know how long this is going to last, and that's wisdom. Why? Because like we said, by the time we get to Psalms 38 and 39, he is the one who is once again pleading for mercy, as he often does. And that's the beauty of the balance in the Psalms. Once again, they're not just like water. They're not just like water. And there's so many different forms of balance in the Psalms. They reach us, if that's a better term, on so many different levels. And so that's one of the reasons why from time to time I like to start out like we did this morning and just read part of it and just let that sit in, right? And then look at the rest of it and see that there are times when it literally describes God's wisdom and his judgment as a great flood. And then sometimes when we just pick down into the details of the definitions, it can give us, God willing, even more insight. So God willing, as we close out, one of the reasons why I called it befriend, is when we were looking at that whole concept of befriending faithfulness in Psalm 37. Let's start at verse 1, please. Fret not yourself because of evildoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Now that term is one I tried to stretch into an illustration. It doesn't really fit. So after I stopped fighting with what the text was actually saying and realized that it is really just a metaphor, I still realized that it reminded me way too much of what I saw in the definition of being upright. Being the kind of person who makes it easier for others to accomplish the things that God is asking them to do. And the reason why it stood out to me is because it stood out in the example that I got to see in some of the young people on campus. And we were playing just basketball, always talking about basketball, right? But I got to see one of the young people, or two of the young people, actually, who have a little bit of clout. And I've talked about the way in which we use our platform. So sometimes our platform is our phone, right? Sometimes our platform is our page, whatever we can, cook up online, online to either market products or just, show who we are, right? Doesn't have to be that serious. But sometimes your platform is simply the way you play around people. Because they say a lot of business gets done on the golf course, right? Well, is it just because everybody likes golf? No. Sometimes you get to learn a lot about people in the way that you see them compete. And I got to learn a lesson in the way that I saw some of the young people competing. Why? Because I'm sure if you've been in any sport, or it doesn't have to be a sport, anything where you want your kids to get ahead, you want them to do well, you can see the way that people compete even in that sphere. And so what I got a chance to see was a situation where the court can be a place where people are like, that's not a foul, that's a foul, no, it's not a foul. It's nothing but arguments. It's nothing but arguments. I got to see one young person stand up and use their platform, they're respected, to basically call fouls in situations nobody would call a foul, meaning most people would require you to debate as to whether or not that was actually wrong. But this individual just stood up and gave people credit for fouls they weren't necessarily wanting to take, or they wouldn't even ask for. And over time, what happened was that one young person of influence ended up infecting somebody else on the sideline, wasn't even in the game, before there could even be an argument. Oh, that's out, bud. And that spread to another individual. And all sorts of people were calling their own fouls in a way where nobody really had to argue about whether or not people, because they started to trust each other. I was like, I need to take a mental picture of this. Because what happened was that one young person who decided they were going to be fair didn't have to stand alone because somebody befriended his faithfulness to what actually happened. And so that's why this passage stood out to me. It was understanding the way that when one person takes a chance to look goofy by doing things in a way that not everybody else is willing to do them, who is going to be that next person to stand beside them and befriend their faithfulness? That's what uprightness began to what it began to look like to me after I started looking at these definitions. They started to bring to mind people who I actually saw behaving in upright ways. And so that is where I hope to leave you. Beyond all the definitions, it takes a little bit of courage in an environment and a time when everybody's looking out for themselves, to one, be that person to stand up and be faithful. But you don't necessarily, we've talked about it before, you don't have to be that person. God willing, you at least have the courage to befriend faithfulness. And God willing, watch it spread. And so my prayer for you is my prayer for me. One of the reasons why I probably brag on them too much, I brag on the next generation, is for whatever grief they take from us, sometimes they're the ones leading and setting the example. God's best to you as you go forward.